This session's a little bit different than anything I've done before. We're going to talk about some strategic aspects of your exam prep, but several technical topics as well. And we will look at answering questions on the live exam and really how you need to go about that. So to keep our session orderly here, let's just keep the comments friendly. No crypto selling of the like. Like I say, there'll be a recording of the session available, and you'll get a follow-up email with all of those resources. So no worries about any of that. And I'll try to cover frequently asked questions throughout the session. We're going to talk about exam prep materials in 2025. There's certainly been a bit of a change with the resources you get with the official study guide I want to mention. And we're going to talk through some key foundational topics. We're going to touch on some areas folks struggle with, but also some areas where I can give you some strategic advantage in preparing more quickly. And we'll actually wrap the session looking at a strategy for answering difficult questions. I've created a framework of sorts that seems to be working for folks in the real world. So I'll take you through that and offer you some resources there. If you have questions along the way, I'll try to keep an eye on the chat. Just throw your questions into the chat as we go, and I'll take a look at those as we go ahead. And if you have an AI assistant on here, do be careful about that. I've found them to be somewhat disruptive. If we've not encountered one another virtually before, I deliver a lot of technical exam prep in the cybersecurity world. In my day job, in my 9 to 5, I'm a VCSO for a regional bank. I'm a cybersecurity strategist in regulated industry. So I'm really putting these skills to work day to day in a meaningful way. Now, last year in my spare time, I did help probably into the tens or hundreds of thousands achieve cybersecurity certifications like the CISSP. The series out on YouTube is somewhere over, I think, maybe 2 million views collectively at this point. But we're going to cover 10 key topics. We're going to go end to end here, and I'll give you a number of tips along the way. I'm going to start with exam prep strategy, and there's a fair bit to unpack here that's important. Because this is really where you're starting the journey. So getting it right from the beginning can save you weeks or months, depending on how you go about it, and certainly thousands of dollars. So I like to think of the elements of the strategy here as something of a pyramid. So at the base, we have to have our roadmap. If this is a journey, this is where you chart your course. Get your strategy together, your materials. You think about time management. How much time am I going to put to this day to day, week to week? But also getting your time management sorted out for exam day. When you walk into that exam room, there's definitely a time management element you need to worry about. You have 100 to 150 questions on this exam in 180 minutes. It means a minute 15 to a minute 45 per question, approximately. It's actually a little less on one end, a little more on the other. So you don't have a great amount of time, and it is an adaptive exam. It's the CAT, the computer adaptive test, so you can't go back. So you need to process these questions pretty quickly, and if you have time management problems on exam day, it's not going to end well, generally speaking. So there are some foundational topics and principles that are very important because they will factor in advanced scenarios and advanced questions. So when you get into advanced topics, a complex scenario, if you don't know the basics of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and non-repudiation and authenticity, you are going to have problems. So there are 3 or 4 foundational areas we're going to touch on that if you learn these well, it's going to serve you well throughout the exam. Because the other fact of the matter is here, when you get into the advanced topics, and with the CISSP, you'll find that it's very broad. There are many topics for you to learn, and you're only going to see them, for the most part, once or maybe twice on the entire exam. Unless, that is, you're unfamiliar with the topic, and then that CAT engine will tend to press on the areas you don't know to see what you do and don't know. But hundreds of topics and as few as 100 questions means you will study for many things that you will not see on this exam. Just resign yourself to that fact today. You can't study 3 or 4 or 500 topics and expect them all to appear. I will give you some practical guidance as we go along as to how you can prioritize based on what we know to be common topics and some other common sense ways to deal with it. But at the end of the day, lots of topics, fewer questions, so don't be disappointed when you spent time studying something and you don't see it on the exam. It's just knowledge that you can take forward. And at the top of this pyramid is the mindset. You hear the phrase, think like a manager. At the end of the day, you're really coming into this exam as a security leader of sorts, and that really defines your role. So the answers that you choose on this exam need to be role appropriate. And getting into that mindset is going to be absolutely critical, so you're not thinking like a technician and picking answers that a SOC analyst or a help desk professional or an offensive security person would choose. You're thinking as a security leader. But you want to work the plan, know your readiness, and when you are ready for the exam or you believe you're ready, that's when you want to schedule the exam and go past that thing on your first try. Now, some folks do like to schedule the exam before they're ready, and they use that as their motivation. I have to be ready by that date. You can do that. That's not the way I do it, but if that's the way you want to do it, fine. You can reschedule the exam. Last I checked, it costs $50 to reschedule. And what I will say is if you know you're not ready, spending $50 to reschedule is certainly less expensive than blowing your entire exam fee. I do believe that the peace of mind offer that comes out every now and again for this exam where you can buy a second attempt for a couple of $100, I believe that was lit up again a few days ago. And somebody just mentioned they think it's $100 to reschedule now. So again, that's why I like to plan my journey, have a bar for readiness. When I believe I'm ready, that's when I'm going to schedule. Like I say, though, I do think you can buy peace of mind, which last I checked was a couple of $100. It's not always available, so you want to check if that's something you're interested in. So Mike says peace of mind is good until the end of the month. So if you buy that and schedule now, you've got an option. So let's talk about recommended exam resources. And I am a believer in many resources and multiple resources because that's what the science tells us. So if I look at changes in the 2024 version of the exam, which is the last update, the changes were very incremental. The 2021 exam topics still apply. In fact, I had an exam candidate who scheduled the exam for the day after the 2024 update released. He did not have time to even go watch the 2024 incremental new topics. He walked into that exam room and he passed the 2024 version of the exam, having studied with only 2021 material. So when I say the changes are incremental, I'm absolutely confident of that. 2024 update brings a few new topics, some updated topics, so basically updates to existing topics. We know technology evolves. Some topics have been elevated to direct mention in the syllabus, and when I see a topic surface from something that was in the exam and now it's mentioned directly in the syllabus, I take that as a sign that it is more likely to come up in the exam. I don't think that ISC squared elevates items directly to the syllabus because they're not important. And other things we see topic-wise are simply moved around or reworded and don't really matter. Cloud computing will factor more prominently in 2024. I think that's not a surprise. But if you've been preparing for 2 or 3 years even, all of your prep for the 2021 version of the exam is still 100% applicable. In fact, if you look at the domains and the weighting, there's virtually no change. So your exam prep is unaffected in that respect. Now, what I will say is over the years, it used to be that if you failed any one of these domains, that you would fail the entire exam, and that's no longer true. But what I will say is it's possible, but in my opinion and experience, unlikely that you will pass if you fail even one domain. That's going to be a pretty big hit. But it is conceivable that you could. So I have the 8-hour course out there that I created for the 2021 version of the exam, still 100% applicable. I created a 2024 addendum that covers the new topics. You can use these together. In fact, my plan originally was to create a whole new series, and the changes were so minor that there was absolutely no point. But the 2024 updates, as I say, are fairly minor. The two together will help. I have a CISSP Exam Prep 2024 playlist I will send you with the replay link. And I've put the key videos at the top of that list. There's 5 or 6 videos that you should absolutely watch, and the rest are less important, frankly. But definitely a lot of folks use my series. It's intended to be used with the official study guide from CyBEX. I'll explain more about why in a moment. But with that official study guide, you get access to their online test bank, it's called. You'll want the 10th edition of the official study guide, preferably in electronic format. I know there are folks who like the physical book, and if that is your preference, great, but I'll tell you 2 things. Number 1, at that point, it is not searchable, and you are basically beholden to how thorough the index is at the back of the book for you to look things up. And the index is not going to be as thorough as being able to electronically search that book in the online reader options, whether you get it on Amazon Kindle or elsewhere. Now, alongside that is an official practice test book, and that is in its 4th edition. What I like about that practice test book is while the study guide gives you 1,000 questions broken down by chapter, and they give you some practice exams that are in the neighborhood of 100, 125 questions. The practice tests give you sets of questions for each domain. So the practice test book is broken up into 8 chapters, 1 chapter for each domain, and so you can focus on your weak domains. They have kind of crippled the test engine and their test bank. It used to be that you could create smaller tests, and Wiley, who's behind CyBEX, they handed some of that off, and so the engine now basically will give you the full set of questions, and you have to take them all. So it's 20 questions per chapter in the study guide. It's 100 questions for each domain in the practice test. So that's a little off-putting, but you know it's not a bad deal given you get it with the book. What I will say about the questions in the books is that they are focused on your mastery of the technology and the concepts. It is not intended to replicate the exam experience. And until recently, there wasn't a good replication of the exam experience, and I'll touch on that in just a moment and tell you what I know in that area today. There's one other book I recommend, and that is CISSP The Last Mile. That is my book I'm selfishly putting out there in front of you. It's 450 plus pages, hundreds of diagrams and reference tables. I try to explain topics simply, just as I do in my video, though I will say that the book goes in greater depth than my video. It touches on every topic in the exam syllabus. I've priced it, it has a starting price of around $10, so I tried to make it accessible to absolutely everyone. And it is a living book, so anytime I update this book, you automatically get a little notification that says, hey, there's a new copy, you can go download it. And in fact, in late March, I'll be dropping an update based on user questions and feedback, just areas where I found little opportunities to explain something a little bit better, more simply, more clearly, more accurately, whatever. In terms of other resources, these are what I'd put into the nice to have categories. There's pocket prep, quantum exams, and then exam flashcards from my group, from Inside Cloud and Security. Now, pocket prep I like because it is good for testing knowledge and focus on weak areas. They give you an exam engine that works from just about any device. It allows you to create bite-sized tests to focus on your weak topics, weak domains, etc. It gives you some of that flexibility you don't get with the test bank that comes with the official study guide. Pocket Prep's 21, 22 bucks a month. I'll give you a link to the best deal I know of. Quantum Exams came out pretty recently. I know one of these guys, and it is a pretty good simulation of real exam question format and language. And in fact, I have a video where I walk through my strategy for processing exam questions using 10 questions from the quantum set. I'll talk about that when we go through how we process difficult questions, which is number 10 on the list of 10 topics we're going to talk about. If you are a flashcard person, I have an app out there that has 1,300 plus flashcards my developers put together you can use on any device. So I'll send you links to all of these, but they're nice to have if you have a little budget. So let's talk about how we use materials effectively. Now somebody's asking the Learns app. So the Learns app questions are different. Their flashcards are different. I don't love the Learns app, though folks do use it and they use it successfully. It will, test your knowledge of the topics. It's not something I'm super stoked about, to be honest. But if it works for you, it's a cheap add to your list of resources. And if you have the budget to throw one more on the stack, and if it works for you, that's great. Everybody's a little bit different, so I don't try to be too rigid in this. But there are some. You're going to find some guiding principles I give you here that you should stick to. And at the end of the day, I want to just say what I tell every group. There's no prize for the longest study time. I do remember appearing at a conference where I was speaking, and somebody came up and mentioned they had just passed the CISSP exam, and I had at the time started making some videos. And I passed the CISSP in about 2 weeks, but I had already been working as an IT and largely security professional for about 20 years, so I had a head start. It may take you a couple of weeks, it may take you months. I've had candidates who are really experienced who take it in a week, but at the end of the day, I want to give you a path that is fast and efficient and as inexpensive as it can be. And how long it takes you depends on how much time you have to dedicate to study and how much experience you have under your belt. This exam does assume you have around 5 years of experience. So at the end of the day, there's a different answer for everybody as to how long it's going to take. But don't just follow my advice here, and I think it's going to give you the best results. So I want to talk to you about the power of repetition, specifically the concept of spaced repetition. So when we're learning any topic, when you go study that topic, you are going to forget some of what you learned over time. And then when you come back and you repeat that study session and you look at that content again, you're going to remember a little more, and you're going to remember it for a little longer each time on the whole. That forgetting curve, we call it, gets a little shallower and a little longer, so your retention improves. That's spaced repetition, and this is a well-researched concept all the way out to how long it takes to memorize anything for the short term and the long term. So to memorize something quickly, we can go through a series of repetitions from a few minutes to a few hours, and we can basically put something in our memory bank for a few days, for sure. But it's not going to be as effective for long-term retention. So for long-term, we have to space that out a little bit further, so out into the weeks, and maybe even into 2 or 3 months. But that repetition counts, and that's one of the reasons a boot camp can work so well, is they cram a bunch of information in your head several times in a short period of time. So on that 5th day, when you go take the exam, it's going to be fresh. You may not remember it as long, but you'll remember it long enough to pass the exam. Now, as for my preference, I'm not a huge fan of boot camps because they're expensive, which makes them not accessible to everyone. They're easily $2,000 to $3,000, most of them. So if that's not in your budget, basically having a self-paced approach is going to be the way you go. If you do some self-paced and you do a boot camp, you do what works for you. I'm certainly not going to tell anyone that a boot camp doesn't work, because just based on that chart right there, you can see it certainly serves its purpose. And if you have a good instructor at the front of the room, sure. So let's talk about the multiple sources and how we make this happen. So I like to say we want to identify the most likely topics, and then we want to go through these in multiple media formats. So I like video, PowerPoint, basically live quiz with a PDF or flashcards, practice exams, and some targeted reading. And that is to say, no, you shouldn't read the official study guide end to end. Now, in the official study guide up in the front of the book, they actually have chapter to domain mappings. So for example, if I look at domains 3 and 4 there, you see domain 3 is covered in chapters 6 to 10, domain 4 in chapters 11 and 12. If you keep those mappings handy, you know where you need to go more or less as you're preparing for different domains. But keep this on hand and you've got a good roadmap. The other thing I really like for you with the official study guide is at the end of each chapter, you have what they call the exam essentials. These are recaps of likely exam topics. They are telling you what you should take away from this chapter. Here are the things you need to remember. And so I actually looked at these and took some notes when I made my study series. It was not an accident that, you know, many of the topics you see in my video show up on the exam because I'm taking guidance from the official study guide. That seems to me to be a pretty smart way to go about it. And really what you want to do is spend 80% of your time on probably 20% of the material. At the end of the day, think of your exam preparation like a funnel. Okay, you've got all the exam content and the study materials out there, and what you need to do is figure out what you don't know as fast as you can, and that's what you need to focus on. And you can do that with practice exams, live review, flashcards, video, reading, whatever. And you want to spend the bulk of your time down here on the things you don't already know. That's going to be real helpful. But the research, when I was a kid, teachers always told us, you know, maybe you're a visual learner or a tactile learner. They tried to, or an auditory learner, they tried to put us in a box. And the research over the decades has since showed us that everybody benefits from a variety of sources. So there's reading, there's exams, there's PDFs and flashcards, looking at the PowerPoint, video. You want to mix and match and repeat these based on your preferences. I'm going to tell you how I do it, and you work through it and figure out what works best for you. I like to start with video because it's something passive. I can put it on the TV or my third screen and just let that roll while I'm doing something else. It gives me a way to kind of figure out, where am I today? What's my current state? And how much work do I have to do to get to my desired state? So I'll start there, then I'll jump over to like a PDF copy of the PowerPoint, flip through again. That gives me some reinforcement, allows me to mark some things up, take some notes on what I need to study on. I did live quiz a lot. So in the couple of weeks that I prepared for the CISSP many years ago, my lovely wife was my quiz master. I gave her the PDF and she would quiz me in different ways. So if you have a partner to quiz you, great way to go about it, because if you get the question right in one direction, they may ask it a different way. And she was really good about changing the form of the question. But the course PDFs can help. I provide PDFs for every video that I create, so you definitely have access to the PDF. But practice time management when you get to your practice exams, okay? Whether you're taking a 20-question practice exam or 100 questions, remember on game day, you have somewhere between 75-ish and 105 seconds per question, like a minute and 15 to a minute and 45, give or take. And you have to plan for worst case, because remember the range is 100 to 150. You need to plan like it's 150, which means you're aiming for around 75 seconds per question. That 75 seconds passes pretty fast when you look at these questions. For closing your knowledge gaps, that's where the official study guide comes in real handy. There are people who sit down and read it cover to cover and go take the exam. A very good friend of mine actually did this. She sat down, read it cover to cover, looked at some of my video resources, went and passed the exam her first try, easy peasy. That doesn't work for everybody, and it's certainly not the fastest way to get there for most of us. So I want you to think twice about doing that, because the lack of mixing and matching is going to hurt your retention. But multiple resources of each type are a great idea. So My book is something a lot of folks get. There are a couple of others out there that are available that other folks may get as well. If you want to have 2 or 3 books, absolutely do that. If you want 2 or 3 self-paced learning courses, for video content, absolutely do that. But those practice questions are really important for making sure that you are ready, that you've mastered a particular domain. So that's really where I want you to get is that you have mastered a particular domain and you're getting, 75, 80, 85% on a domain specific quiz. That's a good sign that you know the content. It's not necessarily a good sign that you have your time management down. It's not a great sign that you are prepared for the format of the exam questions, because what you get out of the test bank with the official study guide in no way resembles the live exam. The wording of the real exam questions are much more challenging. So let's talk about the CISSP mindset. So when you're walking through the practice quizzes, remember, you need to think like a manager. So I'm going to give you the short version of that. And if we're looking at the security planning horizons, your security leaders tend to be up here in the tactical and strategic ranges. They are less hands-on. They are thinking big picture, comprehensive solutions. They're not down there in the nitty-gritty configuration. In fact, one good bit of guidance is to basically think of yourself as a consultant who's there to advise and to never touch the keyboard. It's a great way to think of it. At the end of the day, you're somewhere in that manager to CISO range that's advising. You're solving problems at a higher level. You're not really down there in the weeds as a SOC analyst or an offensive security specialist. Do remember, as a security leader, your priorities are human safety first and foremost. Number one, human safety is your number one priority. Business continuity, protecting the business's profits, making sure the business can run while reducing the business's risk. Those are your top priorities. Due diligence and due care are definitely going to come up. So due diligence is practicing the activities that maintain the due care effort that's the simplest definition. I hate that definition. I put it out there because it is the simplest definition. But due diligence would include things like audits and research that we then roll into due care, which are the actions we perform to secure the organization. So the due care obligation is called the prudent man or prudent person rule, depending on where you read it. To look at it another way, due diligence happens largely, but not entirely, before the decision. So the research, planning, and evaluation, all due diligence. Due care is the implementation, the operation, the reasonable measures. That decision is the line right there in the middle. Now, granted, this is circular in a sense because we need to maintain. So over time, we're going to be doing more research, more planning, audits, assessments, etc. Due diligence is also an ongoing element. I do go into that in greater depth in 2 places. The first place I'll point you to here in a moment, but to remember due diligence, the last way I'm going to put it to you is think before you act. That's due diligence. In fact, you could call it due detect. I'm trying to do my research to detect problems. And due care is where we take the actions that a reasonable person would take. So for due care, I say actions speak louder than words. So due correct is another way we could say that. If I, in my due diligence, identify a problem, I correct that problem in due care. So the long version of this, the full story, comes in my CISSP Mindset video. It is just a hair over 30 minutes. I promise you it is a good use of your time. I have had more than a few people tell me that it was an important video. In fact, several have said it was the most important video. I had one candidate who didn't get to watching it until they were on the way to the exam center, and they watched it while they were en route, and they said it changed everything for them. So, and there are definitely multiple people out there with different versions of this. There's a book out there, there are other videos. So, pick off multiple resources. Multiple perspectives are always a good thing. I really come from an abundance mindset in that respect. Now, we're going to just transition here into some technical topics, my friends. And I want to start with data lifecycle. And what I want to do here is take a broad swipe at a few big topics that are going to influence many more specialized scenarios that you wander into in this exam, and you will wander into a lot. So I want to talk about the data lifecycle. This is how we treat data at rest, in motion, and in use. So it starts, and we're going to start with the Cloud Security Alliance Secure Data Lifecycle. Okay, so there's not one data lifecycle out there that the CISSP or anyone else puts out there. There's two that I'm going to show you today. So it starts with the data being created. So data can be created by users or systems. So a user creates a file, a system logs your access. That's creation of a sort, right? So we're going to store that data. So to ensure that we're storing that data in a secure manner, in a sufficiently secure manner, it should be classified as soon as possible, because at the end of the day, we don't know the level of security that is necessary until we have classified the data. And ideally, data will be encrypted at rest. Data should be protected by adequate security controls based on its classification, which means I'm going to restrict its access based on its sensitivity, right? So sharing data, anytime data is in use or in transit over a network, we need to encrypt that data. So for example, if I'm in a transaction on a website, that data transfer across the network, my credit card information, etc., that's going to be encrypted in a TLS session, right? That's going to use a certificate, and we're going to encrypt my data on the wire automatically. So archival is sometimes needed to comply with laws or regulations that require retention of the data. For example, Sarbanes-Oxley requires we keep accounting records if we're a publicly traded company for a number of years. So legal and regulatory will tend to be the most important drivers of retention. And then we want to we want to destroy the data when it is no longer needed. And we need to destroy it in a way that it is neither readable nor recoverable, even by forensic techniques. That's where something like crypto shredding would come into play. Just deleting data does not prevent recovery through forensic means. So there's definitely some coverage of that on the exam as well. What is secure deletion and what is not? So you want to be very careful about that. So I'm going to just show you another life cycle. I call this a functional secure data life cycle. So just my sequence of events here. So it starts with creation. So as soon as that data is created, as quickly as possible, we want to get it classified. Classification helps us to gauge the sensitivity of that data. Is it public? Is it confidential? Is it classified, top secret, depending on if I'm commercial or government? Then I'm going to store that data, and it's going to be stored securely based on its classification. I'm going to make sure that I secure that data, whether it is at rest on a drive, in transit across the network, in use in an application. It's always going to be protected. And remember that classification begins after we create the data, but data can be reclassified as it travels through the life cycle because the sensitivity may change for a number of reasons. A document may be modified, and when we add a credit card number or we add a social security number, PII, it changes the need to classify and may change the way we protect it. Then we archive, then we destroy. As simple as that. And remember, keeping data around longer than necessary increases risk. But if you remember this functionally, it's going to be very helpful as you're going through different scenarios on the exam and thinking about how we encrypt data in different scenarios. Like on a Windows system, I'm going to use full disk encryption with BitLocker. It's going to be DM-crypt on Linux. For a web transaction, I'm probably using TLS, with a certificate essentially. I may use a VPN for my remote workers, so they're connecting to my environment over an encrypted VPN. So I don't want you to just memorize the steps. I want you to think through the life of the data and really onboard that so you know it. And when it's second nature, it's going to help. So let's move on to number 4, and that is the 5 pillars. So this is a new phrase and a new topic, only kind of. And what I mean by that is the 5 pillars, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the 3 things that you may already know as the CIA triad. That's been on the exam for many years. So and authenticity and non-repudiation have been there as well. It's simply never been referred to as the 5 pillars. But these are not new concepts. They're just referenced in this way on the 2024 version of the exam. They weren't called this before. So know what these are before exam day. So I want to talk to you about the last 2 on that list, authenticity and non-repudiation, just to give you the difference between the 2. I expect you've probably just been clobbered with the CIA triad at this point. So authenticity is about verifying the identity of a subject or a resource, what we'd call an object, to ensure that it is genuine and what it claims to be. It basically provides proof of origin. So for example, requiring multi-factor authentications, when an employee logs in to a corporate network, that ensures authenticity. Non-repudiation, on the other hand, provides undeniable proof that the sender of a message, for example, actually authored it. It prevents the sender from denying that they sent the original message. And in a transaction, it prevents any party from denying that they participated. And maintaining detailed audit logs, for example, that track who accessed what, record, what records in the database, that gives us non-repudiation. When I look at that access log and I see John accessed Sally's record in a database, I can now unequivocally tie John back to that action. So non-repudiation always includes authenticity, but authenticity does not always guarantee non-repudiation. So authenticity simply provides proof of origin. Non-repudiation, to say it another way, provides proof of origin and transactional proof, if I were to paraphrase it. All right, now I want to move on to number 5. This is incident management. So incident management is a little bit different on the CISSP exam because it does not follow one of the major standards. So for example, you have SANS, which has their incident management framework. You have NIST, which has their incident management framework. Neither of those are what the CISSP subscribes to. They have a 7-phase incident management process laid out that they use on the exam. That's the one you should focus on. I'm going to give you the quick version today, and I will tell you that I have a PDF document. I definitely cover this in depth in my book, but I also have a PDF document where I have compared the 3 of these. I've documented the CISSP version in detail with all the right definitions, what happens at each phase, with direct proof as to where it's covered in the official study guide. So I definitely have evolved my research on this over the years because so many folks encounter this. And this is one of the processes I think you should know reasonably well, because a question may drop you somewhere in the middle of this process and ask you what the next step is, for example. So you'll want to know. So here's the acronym, here's the memory device I used to remember the 7 phases of incident management. So detection, response, mitigation, reporting, recovery, remediation, and lessons learned. So it's definitely pretty challenging because it's different than anything you've probably learned before. So detection is about monitoring and identifying potential incidents. Response is where we activate the team and coordinate our response. Mitigation is where we're containing and taking steps to limit impact. Reporting is where we're notifying appropriate parties, understanding that our notification obligations may change based on the nature of the breach. For example, if PII is involved, for EU customers than GDPR factors, and I have a 72-hour notification requirement. Recovery, restoring affected systems and services to normal ops. Remediation, where we're mitigating vulnerabilities that led to the incident, and then lessons learned, where we're documenting and identifying improvements to our policies and controls to make sure it doesn't happen again. So digging in here just one more layer. So triage is the initial assessment. Here with triage, we're asking questions like, is it an incident or is this just an event? Because you have security events and not every event is an incident, but every incident will include one or more events. So the incident is actually declared in the detection phase from the official study guide. So I'll just call that out. Containment and mitigation are about controlling the incident, reducing the impact. Remediation and eradication are about removing the causes of the incident. And recovery is about restoring normal operations after the incident. So that's the quick version. You'll have access to a couple of different options in my follow-up email. But again, diversity of resources is always a good thing. So I try to give you multiple ways to go about it. So the next bucket I'm going to call out here is a big one, and it's frustrating for many people for a number of reasons. It's large, it's important, but we're going to cover some critical foundational topics that are going to have broad-reaching benefit if you understand them well. And that's cryptography concepts. So we're talking about encryption, hashing, and cryptographic algorithms. A lot in here, and again, one of those big topics where you're not going to get questions on everything you learn. Chalk it up to reality. So we have symmetric encryption, which relies on the use of a shared secret key. It lacks support for scalability because it's challenging to distribute the key. Because we have a shared key, we have to then share with multiple parties. It doesn't help us much with non-repudiation either. That's where asymmetric encryption, also called public key encryption, can come into play. So this is great for multi-party communication. It allows us to use a public-private key pair, which supports sharing a session key securely, and it also helps us in non-repudiation. So symmetric is going to be faster for bulk data encryption. Asymmetric is going to be a little bit stronger and better for us when we're dealing with these multi-party conversations. So symmetric encryption, again, has the shared key. You have a single key that you're using for encryption and decryption. The biggest challenge there is getting that key to both the sender and the recipient in a secure way. That's actually where asymmetric encryption can come in handy, because the public key encryption will allow us to share that key securely. So asymmetric, we have a public key that is shared and a private key that is not shared. So I'm going to give you, and you want to be very familiar with symmetric and asymmetric concepts. So let's just walk through a simple example of key exchange. So Franco sends a message to Maria and asks for her public key. So Maria has a public key that she can share. She has a private key that only she has, or her system. So if you think about X.509 certificates, digital certificates that you have on your devices, that might be the certificate that's being used. So that X.509 certificates can have a public key and a private key. So Maria can send her public key to Franco. Franco can use Maria's public key to encrypt the message and send it to her, and then Maria can use her private key to decrypt the message. So with Maria's public key, anyone can encrypt a message for Maria, but Maria is the only one who can decrypt it. That's how it works. So there you go. So asymmetric key types. The public keys are shared amongst the communicating parties. The private keys are always kept secret. So to encrypt a message, we use a recipient's public key. So remember, Franco used Maria's public key to encrypt. To decrypt, Maria used her own private key. For digital signatures, which we can use for message signing and non-repudiation, you'd use your own private key to sign it, and to validate the signature, the recipient can use the public key. So each party in a conversation will have a private key and a public key. The private key is not shared, the public key is. So you're going to want to be very familiar with asymmetric and symmetric. Now let's talk about hashing or hash functions. So how is hashing different than encryption? Well, encryption is a two-way function. What is encrypted can be decrypted with the proper key. Hashing, on the other hand, is a one-way function that scrambles plain text to produce a unique message digest, a hash. So there's no way to reverse a hash if it is properly designed. So a good hash function has 5 requirements. First, they have to allow input of any length, and regardless of the length of that input, the output, the hash, must always be fixed length, the same length. Pardon me. They need to make it relatively easy to compute the hash function for any input. They have to provide the one-way functionality. It cannot be reversible, and it must be collision-free. So what do I mean by collision-free? Well, a collision in the hashing world is when 2 different inputs can produce the same output. That's a problem. That's why MD5 is no longer used in most scenarios. We see MD5 used for file integrity hashing type operations on a local system, but it's not used in greater security operations. But we need one-way functionality. It needs to be collision-free. So if I were to just picture it, you've got variable length input. So any input that I provide to that hash function has to produce fixed length output, and it must never produce the same output for 2 different inputs. So common uses, how are these different cryptographic concepts used together? So symmetric encryption is typically used for bulk data encryption. The most common symmetric algorithm, the gold standard, is AES. And in fact, the government here, for their top secret, I believe, is still using AES 256. Asymmetric is commonly used for distribution of bulk encryption keys, the shared key that we would use in a symmetric session. Identity authentication via digital signatures and certificates, that's asymmetric in nature. Non-repudiation services, anytime we're trying to implement non-repudiation, that's going to be an asymmetric operation. Hash functions are used for verifying digital signatures, generation of pseudo-random numbers, integrity services. So, for example, I remember writing a script once a few years ago where I used a hash function, and I would I would calculate a hash for a file on a server, and then I would copy that file to the cloud, where I would then calculate its hash again to make sure it matched, so I could see that the file's integrity was intact after the copy. Hashes are great for that. Passwords are hashed on a Windows system. When your system passes, sends your password out for authentication, it's passing across the hash, not the unencrypted password. So there are a bunch of algorithms that it doesn't hurt to remember. These could come up in a question or two on the exam. Many people report remembering these and not getting any questions, or maybe getting 1 or 2 questions. I remember getting a couple of questions, but I took the linear version of the exam. So I had a 6-hour, 250 question version of the exam. On a 100 question exam, the odds that you're going to see something are less. But I'm going to give you some tips here. If you want to go down this road, I'm going to tell you where I would prioritize memorizing. So you can take some shortcuts and try to look at things and say, okay, these all have the same block size. So these are block ciphers. I'm going to try to remember the ones that have the same block size. I also look at other little hints like blowfish and skipjack. These are both fish. As is two fish. So what I can see is blowfish and skipjack, they're fish, and they both have a 64-bit block size. Two fish, so 64 times 2 is 128, so two fish has twice the block size of skipjack. So just memory devices that worked for me. But and then RC4, for example, is a stream cipher, so it has no block size. It's one bit at a time. Incidentally, a skipjack is a type of tuna. So I spent some time on the coast. I remember that. So if I were going to prioritize what I was going to remember, think about it this way. If I'm looking at hash algorithms, for example, if I looked at the still in use column, what do you think they're more likely to test you on the CISSP exam? Are they going to test you on current, common, relevant topics, or are they going to test you on legacy topics that aren't around much anymore? Well, I would guess the odds are they are going to be more likely to test you on the things that are widely adopted today, that are important. So if I were going to prioritize, I'd be looking at some of those things. And you can take some shortcuts here, like the Shaw family. You notice that their hash value, their hash length matches the name for the most part for those that are still in use. So that makes it pretty easy. So there are definitely some shortcuts you can take, but I throw this out there because if you remember all of this content, you're not going to get a lot of questions on it just by the numbers, right? I do have kind of a dedicated session. It's somewhere between 30 or 45 minutes, if memory serves, on cryptography, where I'm drilling down all of these. And I'm also covering post-quantum cryptography, which factors today. How do we protect today's computers from quantum threats? All right, so moving on here, we're going to get to number 7, which is security models. So security models is a pretty big topic. It's a bit esoteric as well. So this security models is not something you've probably run into in your day-to-day, even if you've been in cybersecurity for several years. Many folks never encounter security models outside of this exam. It is a likely exam topic just the same. So a security model is used to determine how security will be implemented in a system or an application, what subjects can access in a system, and what objects, what resources they will have access to. So essentially, they are a way to formalize security policy. They're typically implemented by enforcing integrity, confidentiality, or other controls. And what they are enforcing depends on the security model you're working with. Each of these models lays out broad guidelines. They're not specific in nature because it's up to the developer to decide how these models will be used and integrated into specific designs. I'm going to cover one that I believe is probably the most common, and I'll explain why in a moment. But so what is the purpose of a security model? If we boil it down, it provides a way for designers to map abstract statements into a security policy. It determines how security is implemented, what subjects think the user or system accessing resources, what we call the object. So there are 3 properties that are mentioned repeatedly when you're talking about security models. There's the simple security model, which describes rules for read. There is the star security property, which describes rules for write, and the invocation property, which are the rules around the calls, such as to subjects. So let's talk about the Bell-LaPadula model. So Bell-LaPadula is based on the state machine model. It enforces confidentiality. It uses mandatory access control, meaning it is not up to the user, it's up to the system to enforce multi-level security. It's actually used by the Department of Defense. It's of all the security models on the exam, it is the one that is used in the US government. The simple security property says that a subject cannot read data at a higher level of classification, what they call no read up. This may not sound clear yet. It's going to when I'm done, so just stick with me. The star property, the write property, says the subject cannot write info to a lower level of classification. There is no write down. So the way I look at it, since it had Bell in the name, I did it this way. No read up, no write down. And you can use a mnemonic. I said no running under nets with dingoes. I like to create mnemonics when it's something I feel I might struggle to remember. So do that, as you will. So let me just lay it out in a practical sense. So here we have the 4 basic data classifications in the government: unclassified, confidential, secret, and top secret. So what Bell LaPadula enforces is confidentiality. So we have the subject, and what we say is the user. Let's say the subject is the user. They cannot read data at higher classifications than they have clearance for. So if I don't have top secret clearance, let's say I'm only cleared at the secret level, I cannot read top secret data. So maybe Franco is basically cleared for secret, but Maria is cleared for top secret. So this will also prevent Maria from breaking confidentiality, because as a top secret cleared subject, she cannot down classify that data. So she can't say, I'm going to take this top secret data and reclassify it as secret so Franco can read it. There is no write down. So that's an example. So you have models that focus on integrity, and I'm actually pulling a visual from my book here, from The Last Mile. So you have the Biba and Clark-Wilson models that enforce integrity. You have the Bell LaPadula, Brewer and Nash, Graham Deming, and Tate Grant that enforce confidentiality. And then you have what we call some model types: information flow, lattice-based, non-interference, the state machine models. Essentially, you'll find that the models in orange and white are many times based on what you see here in gray in those model types. All right, so we're about 5 minutes from the top of the hour. What I'm going to do is pause here. I'm going to give you a 5-minute break. So let's take a bio break. Stretch your legs, and then we're going to come back and we're going to cover the last 3 topics. They're bigger topics, including digging into how we answer questions on the exam. So I'll see you back here just about 2 minutes after the hour. All right, my friends, we are back. I'm going to take a look at the comments here, the chat. We do have a couple of questions. No, you don't need to pass all the domains, but you need to walk into the exam center prepared to pass all the domains. It's going to be difficult if you're really just majorly deficient in one. Yes, great idea to read how other people pass the exam, with the caveat that you need to work through which materials you use and how you use them to find what works best for you. Different strokes for different folks. All right, my friends, let's jump into number 8. This is another big one: quantitative risk analysis. The risk formulas in particular are a likely exam topic, so you're going to want to be ready for these on exam day. So you've got 2 types of risk analysis they call out on the CISSP: quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative is the one that assigns a dollar value to elevate the effectiveness of your countermeasures. It's an objective measure of your defense. The formulas you need to worry about most directly are exposure factor, single loss expectancy, the annual rate of occurrence, and the annualized loss expectancy. So the exposure factor is the percentage of loss that an organization would experience if a specific asset were violated by a realized risk. The single loss expectancy represents the cost associated with a single realized risk against a specific asset. And you calculate the single loss expectancy by finding the value of your asset and its exposure factor. So what's the impact going to be of a single loss? So if I have a $100,000 asset, let's say that's a car, and a crash is going to damage it 30%, that means my single loss expectancy is 30 grand. Whether that's a car or a building or what have you, you have to calculate that probability. Now, the annualized rate of occurrence factors in based on how often we expect an event will happen within a single year. So if we have an event that happens less than once per year, the annualized rate of occurrence is less than 1. So it's really simple math. If let's say we expect a tornado is going to hit our office once a year, the annualized rate of occurrence is 1. If it's every 2 years, the annualized rate of occurrence is 0.5. It's once every other year. If we're going to see a tornado every 10 years, once every 10 years, then our ARO is 0.1. It's a 10% chance effectively. And when we have all of that information, we can calculate our annualized loss expectancy. So we can see how much we are spending across all of our instances for a threat and calculate our yearly cost. So the ALE is basically single loss expectancy times the annualized rate of occurrence. So let me give you an example. We have an office building that's $200,000. A hurricane's going to do 50% damage. And the hurricane is going to be probability of 1 every 10 years. And that's how the exam's going to do it, but they're going to be more complex about it. They're going to give you a scenario and say, you know, we have this asset that's worth this much, and this event could cause, you know, this much damage, and we expect it's going to happen this often, and they will expect you to know the formulas and do the math. So in this case, we see our asset value is 200,000. We see our exposure factor is 50%. So our single, and we can see the single loss expectancy then is 100,000, right? Because single loss expectancy is the value of the asset times the exposure factor. Now I can calculate the annualized loss expectancy by the fact that my SLE was 100,000. My annualized rate of occurrence is once every 10 years, so it's 0.1. So my annualized loss expectancy is $10,000. So what that tells me is that if I'm spending more than 10 grand a year on that safeguard, I'm potentially throwing money away, and there are going to be some other decisions in there like human safety and so forth. But that's what it means to have a cost-effective security control. I don't want to spend more on the security control than the replacement value of the asset. Bearing in mind for certain assets, it's difficult to calculate their objective quantitative value. So what is the value of my business's reputation if I go cheap on security controls and I have a data breach? I'm potentially going to lose millions in reputation that I can never regain, right? So I have to think through the situation pretty carefully. But when we get through those formulas, you know, safeguard evaluation is making sure that our security controls are effective technically and from a business perspective. They need to mitigate risk, they need to be transparent, difficult to bypass, and cost effective. So we can calculate cost effective by looking at the annualized loss expectancy before the safeguard and after the safeguard. So if I take my ALE, my annualized loss expectancy before the safeguard, subtract what my loss expectancy is after I put that control in place, minus the cost of that control, I can come to a reasonable number that tells me, that answers the question, what's cost effective? So I want the value of the safeguard, the money that I'm spending to secure something, to be less than that number. So these formulas are complex. I have a video out there. There's no single perfect resource. I do have a video out there that's a few minutes long that's a dedicated walk through those formulas. So something worth taking a look at if you have time. It's 30, 35, 40 minutes long. So let's talk about number 9, which is cloud computing. So cloud is going to factor more heavily in 2024. You know, it's a bigger factor in our lives all the time. But in the last 5 years, we've really seen an explosion in cloud compute. So going to want to be very familiar with the shared responsibility model, cloud service models, and cloud deployment models. So we'll look at shared responsibility here by cloud service model. So when you're in your own data center on premises, the formula is really easy. It's 100% the business's responsibility. When we move into the cloud, let's say we move into what we'd call infrastructure as a service, that's IaaS, we will hand some responsibility over to the cloud service provider, the CSP. When we move into platform as a service, we're handing even more responsibility over to the service provider. And then when we move into SaaS, we're handing into software as a service. As a customer, we are really little more than a user of the application. We have a little bit of responsibility for user access and data backup, data recovery, but it's largely the responsibility of the cloud service provider. So to look at it another way, you've got private cloud when it's in your data center. When we connect our private data center to the public cloud and we start deploying virtual machines, often you will have a connection via VPN or MPLS. That's what we'd call a hybrid cloud. So if we want to look at just examples of IaaS, if you're not a heavy user of cloud, I'm just going to give you some basics here. So IaaS is where the CSP provides the building blocks, the network, the storage, the compute, the server, the hypervisor like Hyper-V or VMware. The CSP manages the data center, the staff, the hardware. But the key benefits there is we can basically pay for what we use. It's typically, pay as you go. You can scale up and down as you need it. You're getting rid of some of your, energy and cooling costs in your own data center. You're getting out of the data center business. So examples of IaaS would be Azure Virtual Machines, Amazon EC2, Google's Compute Engine. We look at platform as a service. The customer is responsible for deployment and management of apps. You're handing over more control to the CSP and you're focused on develop and deploy. The CSP manages provisioning, configuration, hardware, operating system, updates. There's a lot we're not worried about there. The core infrastructure is just dealt with entirely by the service provider. We have global collaboration for app development at this point. We can deploy in instances all over the place very quickly, and we can run in multiple languages easily. Great solution for our app. Azure SQL, API management. Microsoft has what they call Azure App Service, where we can host largely web apps is what we'd put in there. So lots of PaaS apps out there. And then software as a service is where, as a customer, you're just configuring features. So the CSP is responsible for management, operations, service availability, notifying you of service impacts. The customer retains some responsibility in access management, making sure you don't give users too much access that they mess up your SaaS instance. And if you're hit by a ransomware attack, for example, and your cloud storage is completely locked, you have some responsibility there for backup or configuring some form of backup, so you're not completely off the hook. But in a SaaS scenario, the customer has limited responsibility and they don't need a lot of skill. They can get in there and it's basically turn it on and start using it, always up to date. Maintenance is not your problem. So examples of SaaS would include like Office 365, ServiceNow, Salesforce, all really popular SaaS applications. So just one other wrinkle of cloud, and again, one of those things that might come up, it might not, and that's about customer rights and capabilities to perform investigation or audit in the cloud versus on-prem. So your cloud service providers have right to audit clauses, and these are often written into supply chain contracts as well that tell us whether an auditor can visit the premises to inspect and ensure that a contractor is complying with contractual obligations. I can tell you right now with your public, your CSPs, Azure, Amazon, GCP, you don't have the right to just walk in there and audit, but there's a fix for that. So that right to audit would allow us to find operational deficiencies that are out of compliance with our contract, goods not delivered, any sort of conflicts. In the public cloud, you can basically download a SOC 2 report or several other what we'd call assurance documents on demand. Like for a SOC 2 report, and you'll want to be familiar with SOC reports. I cover those in depth in the book, in the video series. You'll see something on that. You want to be familiar with SOC 2 Type 2. But you can download them on demand from the CSP, so that's how they deal with right to audit. They just give you a report you can download, and if they don't update it, every year, they'll give you a gap statement that tells you why they're still in good shape. So just know that cloud's going to factor. You want to dig into the deployment models as well, but that's where we are. All right. So I saved quite a bit of time for the end here, just not knowing what we'd run into because I wanted to talk about answering questions on the exam because this is the part people really struggle with. I've created a solution for this problem, and I have a lot to say here, and I have some good resources I think you'll find very helpful. So I want to talk to you about answering questions, managing time, remembering that if you encounter the worst case scenario and you have 150 questions, your time per question is going to be limited to around 75 seconds. You got to process and move pretty quickly because you can't mark them and come back later, right? You're in a cat scenario. In fact, I had somebody comment just today that the strategy, what I call the read strategy, I've kind of productized a way to systematically process questions. This person said it was a game changer for her and just how she broke down the exam questions on exam day. So READ is an acronym and it stands for Review, Eliminate, Analyze, and Decide. I'm going to take you through this. We're going to look at a handful of questions together. And then I have a video for you that actually leverages some of the questions from quantum exams. And I created that video specifically because quantum was the first product I'd seen out there that, quantum is not the tool you want to use to learn all of the content. That's not what they're for. They're really about giving you something closer to the wording and complexity that you'd see on the live exam. So the READ strategy: review, eliminate, analyze, and decide. So basically, this is an easy to remember strategy. If you start onboarding the READ strategy during your exam prep, you will have this on autopilot easily on exam day. Many people have done it already. So the goal is first to review. We want to find out what's the core issue we're solving for in the question. You're going to find that in these questions, the wording is challenging. You want to read the question and see what they are truly asking. You want to make no assumptions. Don't invent probable circumstances that are not explicitly stated. So read through the details. What are they asking? What are the requirements? Is there any context that I need to look at here? Is there a specific framework or regulatory requirement that is part of the equation here? For example, if they mentioned, healthcare, sensitive, protected health information in the US, that tells me I'm subject to HIPAA regulations. Absolutely, I want to be aware of that. Actually, laws and regulations are a big part of Domain 1 on the exam, and it's actually a really easy topic. It's just some rote memorization for you, just remembering where they apply. Another good question to ask yourself in the CIA, in the review stage, is what leg of the CIA triad does this question speak to? Is it talking about confidentiality, integrity, or availability? That can help me filter down to right answers, because in the eliminate phase, what I want to do is find which answers are definitely not correct, because you're going to receive, generally speaking, you're going to have multiple choice questions. So somebody asked a moment ago, will I see a lot of drag and drop questions or hotspot type questions, what we'd call performance-based questions or the advanced questions? The answer is no, you're not going to see a lot of those. Almost entirely multiple choice. It's really what you want to focus on. So in my video, I do talk about how you can process some of those advanced questions, but don't spend a bunch of time on that because you're not going to see a lot of them. So the eliminate phase, now that I know what's being asked, I want to just filter out the answers that are definitely not the best answer, which is what I'm looking for, right? I'm going to remove unimportant details, answers that I see that are intentionally meant to distract me, wrong answers. This step is often going to get rid of one or two options. At the end of the day, if you're not an expert in the topic and you can only get it down to two questions, you now have, or two answers, you're guessing from one of two answers. You have a 50-50 shot. You have doubled your odds of getting this question right. So that's an important step. So when we've eliminated anything that's definitely wrong, now we can analyze and figure out which of these is best. So I want to prioritize based on context. So I'm going to see if any of the answers meet all requirements, because you're going to have some questions that have one requirement, others that have multiple. So you need to know what your requirements are. And I would sort the requirements in priority order. Well, what do you mean by that, Pete? Well, human safety is probably more important than other priorities, right? Human safety is my number one priority. So definitely priorities exist there. Regulatory compliance trumps my corporation's best practices, right? So the law, following the law, if that conflicts with my organization's recommended best practices, the law wins. So a couple of tips for this step. Just remember your priorities, right? Human safety, keep the business running securely, manage risk while exercising due diligence and due care. And due care is really important for security leaders because your executives can get in legal trouble for not exercising due care. If they know that there is a security risk, for example, that's exposing sensitive customer data and they do nothing about it, they're going to open the organization to risk, to lawsuit. But remember, as a leader, call an outside expert in specialized situations is an option. So if you have an answer out there that says call in an expert, maybe for a third party, for an external audit, that's totally an option if you can justify it. And then basically, based on your analysis of the situation, pick the answer. But what I like to do is evaluate each answer by itself, identify what I do and don't like about each, quickly, obviously. I'd like to look for one option that encompasses all the others, because remember, as a security leader, you're going to be more at the tactical or strategic phase. You're a big picture person. So if I have one answer that encompasses others, I'm going to tend to prefer that answer. Be wary of answers that call for a very technical, hands-on response. That's not to say that the answers will never be technical, because technology is involved here. But I'm going to be very wary of a very technical, hands-on answer where the next step they have me do is to, technically implement or change something in particular, right? So think of it in that respect. Take good people or process-focused answers over technical answers if you're choosing. Now, folks out here asking some questions about the different exam engines out there. I would say many of them are going to offer you, they're all going to offer you some value, right? The quality isn't exactly the same across all of them. Bosun tends to be a little more expensive than others, but most out there are at least going to help you with the technical concepts. So for practice exams, I say don't just jump right on the most expensive. For exam experience, I prefer Quantum over Bosun. That's my preference. I think you can make your own choice there. Another question was, are there dumps of the CISSP exam? So I have two things to say to that. Number one is no, there are not. And number two, that would be breaking ISC Squared's Code of Ethics if you were to use dumps. That breaks their professional ethics, and if they found out you did it, they would not certify you, or they would remove your certification if you had one. So just be very, very careful about that. At the end of the day, you can all do this. Work the system, gauge your readiness by your collective knowledge here. If you're doing well on the exam, if you're doing well on the practice exams, if you know the material, if you've got your time management down, you should be in good shape. But regulatory requirements, like I say, override company policy. So when the law is involved, just remember that goes up the chart. Human safety goes to the top of the chart. Keeping the business running is your number two priority, right behind human safety. And I have a one-page version of this. I'll send you a link to basically an image. It's just a little the PNG or a JPEG that gives you the quick reference of this. If you just keep this open on a screen while you are taking practice quizzes and you have just this screen with a little practice, you should be able to work your way through the read strategy and just develop a system to where you're not even thinking about read anymore. You're just reviewing, eliminating, analyzing, and deciding. So there are different strategies out there. Some people will tell you, for example, read the question twice. Somebody else says read the question 3 times. My question to you is how much time do you have to read a question 3 times if you potentially have as little as 75 seconds to process a question? If you're not a fast reader, it may take you 75 seconds to process this question. You need to start breaking it down as quickly as you can. That's why I wanted to give you a process that you can objectively step through. So, important decision criteria. Let's talk about this. I've got a kind of a top 10 list here for you. When you're choosing an answer, remember it meets CISO priorities, human safety. It enables continued business operation. If I'm choosing security controls, it's a cost-effective control. Number 2, it meets all solution requirements. And if it doesn't meet all solution requirements, then it meets the highest priority of the requirements. When multiple answers meet requirements, the chosen answer has objective advantages over other solutions. And by that, I mean when you're choosing between 2 answers that can solve the problem, you are choosing one that, for provable reasons that you can explain, one option has provable advantages over the other that make it the better choice, because you are going to encounter nothing but questions on this exam where multiple answers seem plausible and in fact may be plausible, and you have to get to the best one. That is your life here. There is nothing perfect. So as you are going through practice questions, and one bit of comment type feedback I get frequently is somebody wants to talk about the potential answers to a question not being perfect. Well, I would rather, I would do it this other way. Well, yeah, you might, but we don't live in a perfect world, and that's basically the view of this exam. They will give you sometimes a choice of imperfect options, of less than ideal options, and you will have to make lemonade with those lemons. You have to work your way through and identify the objectively best option that you have there. When no answer meets all requirements, pick the one that meets the highest priority requirement. If you're dealing with a human, a question that impacts human safety, the answer that, best protects human safety is going to be the one. Favor those all-encompassing answers, the big picture answers, where if one answer encompasses another, that's going to be the way I'll approach the question over something that's a little more hands-on and down in the details. Beware of those technical hands-on solutions. The CISSP is going to tend to focus on people and process more than technology. That is not to say that they couldn't throw a question in there where they say, hey, you're a SOC analyst, what are you going to do here? They may throw you a curveball. Anything's possible. And in that case, role appropriate for the party tasked with the solution. Maybe they say, hey, you are the data custodian, or you are the data owner. What are you going to do? Make sure that you are bearing in mind the role tasked with solving this problem. So if that is what is asked in the question, that's an important detail you should filter down to in the review phase of the read process. What is the focus of the question in the CIA triad? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So that being said, I'm looking for the answers. I'm looking for what the question is focused on. If data encryption, for example, if it says I need to encrypt data, that's confidentiality. And I'm going to look for answers that focus on confidentiality. I'll look for the answer that is scoped and tailored to the organization. I talk about this in book and video source about solutions being scoped to the organization's need, to their risk appetite, to their budget, because every organization is different. So even if you're using a risk framework, for example, from somebody like NIST, you still have to scope it to your industry, to your risk comfort level, to your appetite, to the budget your organization has. Then number 10, be wary of answers that solve for all or every situation and leave you no room for tuning or tailoring or iteration over time from a baseline. Answers that seem too good to be true usually are. So the good news is I'm going to share a video with you in a moment, and I actually go through the read strategy for a question that focuses on each of these 10 concepts using questions from quantum exams. I actually teamed up with quantum exams, and I was not paid to do so, in case you wonder when you see that video. I actually liked the quality of their questions. I analyzed all of their questions and said, here are the 10 I would like to incorporate into a video, and we agreed to do that. And I'm going to share just one more bit of practical advice, and I want you to remember this when you go watch, because I expect most of you will go watch my difficult questions video. I want you to remember what I'm about to tell you here, okay? Just answer the questions with the facts you are given. Do not assume or invent additional scenario context. Don't say, well, in that situation, this is probably true or that is probably true. I can tell you I've had a handful full of people that wanted to argue about the questions in that video, and they were wrong 100% of the time. And in most of those cases, they were assuming additional context, or they were arguing that, well, that's not the way you'd solve it in the real world. Well, yeah, you may be right, but the exam is going to many times give you imperfect options, and you need to work with the options you were given. So let me just roll back here. Just answer the question with the facts you were given. Do not assume or invent additional scenario context. So when you're reviewing, you're trying to figure out what are they really asking for here? What constraints do I have in terms of, regulations or obligations or human safety or priorities? I'm looking at just what's in the question. So that being said, I want to walk through some sample questions, and we certainly haven't covered, I don't think, any of these concepts. So you're going to get a flavor for reality here. And that is, you may step into some topics where you don't understand the topic all that well. And that is entirely possible on an exam with so much material. So here we go. Rico's chain of sandwich shops wants to provide secure free wireless for customers. Which option best meets the need without requiring users to have an account? So if I'm looking at this from a read perspective, I'm saying I want free wireless, and I don't want users to have an account, which means I cannot have them log in. I can't, it's going to have to be a pretty simple solution at that point. So this is going to rule out a lot of things that I might use to secure. So my options are, number one, a captive portal. Number two, WPA3 in SAE mode. So that's pretty strong wireless security. That's good stuff. Latest edition of WPA. WPA2 in pre-shared key mode, or WPA2 in enterprise mode. So if I were to look at these options, there are a couple here that I could I'm going to move from the review phase. So my review phase, I said I need to give customers wireless, and I don't want to give them a login, right? That's what they're asking me. It was pretty simple. So I know, number one, A is not the answer, because a captive portal will require a login of some sort. If you go to the airport, for example, and you get that captive portal for free airport Wi-Fi, you're either going to have an account, or they're going to ask you to use your social identity, which means they are capturing login information. The question I'm interpreting told me not to have the user have an account. It didn't say that I need to not have to issue the users an account. It said the user should not have to have an account. It didn't talk about who issued it. I'm looking at what the question asked, not what I might assume would be the case. The other one I'm going to knock off here is WPA2 in enterprise mode, because we're not talking about an enterprise scenario. We're talking about a business to consumer scenario. I do know what enterprise mode means, and it means inconvenience. So I've got WPA3 in SAE mode, which is more secure than WPA2 in pre-shared key mode. So which of these would be the answer? So both of these meet the need of secure wireless without the need for user accounts. However, pre-shared key makes WPA2 pre-shared key less convenient. So both meet the technical requirements, but WPA3 has an objective advantage in that it will be more convenient for the user. You can learn more about WPA versions in book and video content. I kind of walk through the lineage of wireless, the wireless security protocols going through the WPA families and more. So let's get into number 2 here. I've got 3 more questions I want to walk through with you. So somebody just mentioned WPA3 won't be compatible with older devices. Yeah, it means that when people walk in with new devices, they're going to be great. If somebody walks in with a Windows, XP machine, they're going to be in trouble. I know as a business which of those, customers I'm going to prioritize. Real world scenario. Acme has implemented multi-factor authentication using SMS as a second factor. What is the primary security concern with this design? So I have MFA, which is good for authenticity, for example, but SMS is not potentially ideal, right? So what's the primary security concern? Well, is it that SMS messages may be stored on the receiving phone? Well, they in fact are. SMS messages can be sent to more than one device. Well, that is also true. So SMS messages are not encrypted. And 4, SMS messages can be spoofed by senders. So all of these things are true. So they are asking me in an MFA scenario, what is my greatest concern about SMS as a second factor? Well, I need to think through my priorities here. So I do know in the real world that SMS has been compromised multiple times. What I can say, number one, my primary concern is not that the message is may be stored on the phone, because that phone is going to be in my user's hands. If my user has lost their phone and it is unlocked, that means I have failed on multiple other levels as a business, and my user has as well. So not my greatest concern that the message is on the phone. I have to send it to them. So I'm going to cross that off right away. The other thing is an SMS message can be sent to more than one device. My identity platforms are not going to, multicast that message to multiple providers. They're going to send it to the user's registered device. So if I'm using, Microsoft's cloud identity platform or Duo or OneLogin or Okta, any of those, I'm not worried about multiple devices. So it brings me down to 2 options. And so now I'm down to the analyze phase. My options are SMS messages are not encrypted, or SMS messages can be spoofed by senders. So here I think the option is obvious. The answer here is 3, SMS messages are not encrypted. So because they are not encrypted, they could be sniffed. So if my user was in a coffee shop and they're using SMS for their second factor, somebody could sniff on an unsecure wireless network, like might be the case in a mom and pop coffee shop. Now, SMS messages can be spoofed, but that's not going to be my primary concern isn't that somebody is spoofing an SMS instead of, send the message coming from the identity provider. It's going to be somebody sniffing, basically. So my primary concern is that the message is not going to be encrypted. So that being said, you can at least see my logic here, and we can argue all day long about subjective elements of this, but I came down to an objectively better answer for reasons that I can explain to you. And that's what you want to try to do as you're working your way down to the answer, that as a business leader, your answer protects human safety. It reduces the risk while not interrupting the business, and it does so cost effectively. If you can check those 3 boxes with a solution, you're doing something. protect human safety, keep the business running, and do so cost effectively. 1, 2, 3. All right, number 3. So Greg has been tasked with identifying areas the corporate wireless network is available where it should not be. What is the best method to identify problem areas? So I'm thinking about what they're asking here. So they're saying my wireless has too much coverage. And I'm going to ask myself, why do I care about that? Well, because if my wireless has visibility, like say out into the parking lot, for example, then people who are not employees, if they can get into my parking lot, they can potentially try to break into my wireless network. So what is my best method to identify where my wireless coverage exists, where it should not exist? So I could, my options, I could use war driving. That's a way to sniff wireless networks for sure. A site survey, war walking, which is basically, walking down the street and trying to find wireless networks instead of driving. There's actually a war flying version where you use a drone to do that. And then a network design diagram. So a network design diagram, if I'm looking at my options here, I see a couple of options that don't make a lot of sense to me. War driving in particular doesn't make sense for my corporate network. I'm not going to need to get in a car and go anywhere, and I'm looking at these other options. So a network design diagram is going to show me where I've placed my access points. So based on the devices I've deployed, that is going to give me an idea of where my wireless signal is broadcasting. Could I use that diagram and do some targeted war walking around the campus to maybe find something? Sure. Or could I do a site survey? So in this case, as a security leader, I'm going to apply that. I'm going to apply a principle here that makes one of these an objectively better answer. So war walking, I'm definitely not doing. I like network design diagram. I like a site survey. So the one that wins out here is a site survey. So it meets the need through physical real world validation. It's going to allow us to, process our actual coverage. A network diagram definitely offers us some clues on where to look, but it does not give us direct confirmation. War driving and war walking can definitely indirectly expose these issues, but they're not primarily intended for these purposes. I could also argue that in a site survey, I will typically be using a network diagram that shows my coverage. So this option provides certainty through due care, and it's well suited to this use case. A site survey is exactly what I probably did to place those access points in the first place. So that's how we do it. And even if Greg, and again, even if Greg was not the CISO, I'm still thinking like a manager. It didn't tell me the role of the person, so I'm not assuming Greg is anything, am I? I am not going to invent or imagine additional context that was not given to me in the words of the question. As someone who has written questions for many certification exams, so I've been an exam author, not for the CISSP, to be clear, I can see in the questions I see on many of these exams a concept that is exercised by many of these certifying entities, and that is that they, in their review process, remove all words that are not absolutely necessary to come to a conclusion. That's why one of the reasons why the wording is so challenging, because they remove that information. So in this case, I come to this answer thinking like a manager, even though I have no idea what Greg's job title was. I didn't assume anything. Yes, I agree with you. The CISO probably isn't the one out there conducting a site survey or doing war driving or walking or flying or what have you. But I'm thinking like a manager. It didn't tell me that I was handing this off to a white hat hacker. All right, one more. Contoso has offices with networks across the city, and they want all locations to appear like a single network. which option would best achieve this goal? So in the review phase here, I'm trying to figure out what it is they're asking me. So I see here we have multiple offices. I need to connect those multiple offices, and it tells me across the city. So I'm thinking like my city. I live in Houston. I'm thinking across my city means I can't hit them with, just Wi-Fi across the campus, right? They're going to be further than that, but they're not across the country. But I need to make sure that it appears like a single network, which means that my users aren't going to know that the application server that they're connecting downtown isn't sitting out there right by them in the suburbs. They need to not know. If they're out at a branch office, it needs to look like that server is in the server room at the end of the hall, which may in that branch office just be a wiring closet, let's face it. So my options here are SD-WAN, VXLAN, fiber channel over Ethernet, or VLAN. So I have 4 options here that in most respects could conceivably solve this problem. So I want to rule a couple of these out, and the ones I'm going to rule out are dead simple. So I reviewed what they were asking me, and they're asking me for give the user and everybody in the same office type experience, single network type experience across the city. I'm going to cross off SD-WAN because I'm really dealing with a metro area network scenario here. I'm not dealing with a true WAN. So I don't think that's going to be best suited for this use case. I'm going to knock off fiber channel over Ethernet because that's a storage protocol. That's going to be a protocol. It's a storage protocol we run over IP, over TCP/IP. So those 2 are out. I'm down to VXLAN and VLAN. So which of these is better and why is what I'm down to. But I've got a 50-50 shot, right? It's much easier in this case. I'm going to wait just a few seconds. Which do you think it is here? So the best answer would be VXLAN, an encapsulation protocol that carries VLANs across routable networks. It gives the appearance of a single network across distance without the need for physical network changes. We, as I mentioned, fiber channel over Ethernet, storage related. SD-WAN is for wide area. We're really dealing with a metro area. So VXLAN is going to allow us to do some software-defined networking that gives the appearance of a single network, and it's going to be 100% logical. Again, this is another one that's covered in the video, in the book. In fact, one of my updates in the March edition is no book out there covers software-defined networking as perfectly. I'm going to do it as close to perfectly as possible in the March edition. I went all the way back to the RFC and I broke it down for you. So networking, I fully appreciate, is very complex, especially if you don't have experience with this. And I'll say that my recent experience with networking has been very much in a virtualized networking, public cloud, hybrid cloud context. It's been a lot of years since I had to lay a hand on a physical switch. So if you're not a networking person, there's going to be a bit of work there for sure. So that's what we're talking about. But in this case, VLAN is going to be more for local network. The VXLAN is going to allow us to fit that middle ground of metro area without having to do anything in terms of hardware typically. So hopefully that gives you a feeling for analyzing the questions. And I've got something else for you again. We came down to objective criteria. I'm not trying to fully replicate the exam experience for you here. I'm trying to get you to a point to see that we analyze these questions. And as we talk about them, we're taking a lot more than 75 seconds, right? You've got to do all of that reasoning in your head in, a minute 15 to a minute 45. It's quick. So it's been, I don't know, 3 months ago, I made a video called How to Answer Difficult Questions with the Field-Tested Read Strategy. I let the read strategy sit out there for a few months. I let people try it. I let them come back and tell me that it works. And then Quantum Exams released their product, and you will hear people say that it is a bit more expensive, and in fact it is. And I forget where they're priced at, and all of you can tell me. I want to say it's in the neighborhood of 140, 150 right now. In my opinion, for um, what it does, it's good. It's the first one I've seen that I thought did a reasonably good job of replicating the exam experience. So what I did was basically took those 10 principles that I gave you in that list, and I went through the entire quantum exams question bank, and I found 10 good questions that map to each of those 10 priorities. And I walk through them in this video. And I will tell you that I've had users come back, and I give you the opportunity to guess the answer before I walk you through it. And then I let you guess again after I walk you through it, and we see how many you get before and after. And I've had, if I had to give you the most common, I've had people come back and say, okay, I was 2 of 10, after you read the question. I was 4 out of 10 after we went through the reasoning. They are difficult questions. And some people would even say that quantum is a little more difficult than the real thing. I have no perspective to give you there, but I can tell you they're quite challenging. And if you watch that video and you disagree with me on any of those answers, I am happy to help you find the flaw in your thinking. And, on the off chance we manage to get down to a flaw in one of those questions, I believe that is highly improbable. But if you are absolutely convinced the answer on one of those questions is wrong, reach out to me, and all you have to do is be polite. I did have somebody come back and they got a little fired up and they're like, oh, this question's bogus. That option's crazy. That's the real world, my friends. This exam is going to give you a series of potentially imperfect options, and you need to deal with the hand you're dealt. Businesses out there don't have unlimited funds. They don't have, absolute freedom. There are business constraints, budget, regulations, location, etc., right? So hopefully I've given you some food for thought here. So the last thing I have to tell you here is get your materials together and get started. Start putting the system together that you're going to use. We talked about using multiple materials. Amongst the resources that I'm going to send you over, so I'll send you links to, to my videos and my books. I'm going to send you a link to the cybersecurity Discord, where I'm a professor, and one of the creators of Quantum Exams, he sits over there too. I'll come over there and answer questions when my name is flagged, but I usually only chime in when I see you're talking about something Pete sourced and you don't come to good reasoning on your own, or I see something that needs clarification and I feel like I need to add something to the discussion. But I'm always watching, not always speaking, because we have a lot of great folks over there who are participating day to day, and I like to let everybody play their role. That's how we all grow. I just keep an eye. I kind of keep an eye on the notifications where my name gets mentioned, and I watched. But I like Discord because you can talk through some questions over there. It's good practice. You see other people's perspective, and frankly, you get better at answering the questions, and you have a group of people there that are happy to explain why one answer is better than the other. It's nice to have that built-in support. For sure. So I'll send out all of those links. I'll send out the PDF that I mentioned I created around the incident management on the CISSP. They share that one a lot over on the Discord, I know, as well. If you have any questions, you'll have my email address. You can certainly respond there. You can put comments below my videos. You can reach out privately on LinkedIn. And if you have any other questions when we walk away, though, don't hesitate to reach out and do that. I hope you get some value out of this session. I will have the recording. There's a bit of editing and prettying up I do after our session here, so I'll get this uploaded and shared out to you in the next few hours. And watch it and enjoy it as you will. I hope you have a great first exam or next exam experience if this is not your first exam. So Good luck. Take care. Stay safe.